else commands all the hosts of heaven? Who else could make every kingdom bow down? Who else can whisper and darkness tremble? Only a holy God. What other beauty and such graces? What other splendor outshines the sun? What other majesty rules with justice? Only a holy God. Come and behold Him, the one and the only. Cry out, sing holy, forever a holy God. Come and worship the holy God. What other glory consumes like fire? What other power can raise the dead? What other name remains undefeated? Only a holy God. Come and behold Him, the one and the only. Cry out, sing holy, forever a holy God. Come and worship the holy God. Who else could rescue me from my failing? Who else would offer His only Son? Who else invites me to call Him Father? Only a holy God. Only a holy God. Come and behold Him, the one and the only. Cry out, sing holy, forever a holy God. Come and worship the holy God. Come and behold Him, the one and the only. Cry out, sing holy, forever a holy God. Come and worship the holy God. I be seated. We're going to go ahead and just a little bit, my dad's going to come up and we'll start our second night. But I was thinking, the importance, again, of what we're doing. And we talked yesterday about just how this is an attack, that where we are is not neutral. Actually, I was in the car and I turned on the radio and it was a message and the pastor said the exact same things. Like, look, this is not a neutral world. This is a battleground. But we don't always see the danger. So earlier today I was going on a run, and as I was running on a trail, I looked down, and my worst nightmare, something that everyone, if you know me, this has happened. Like, I look down, and I'm about to put my foot down, and there's a snake in the pit. Little snake, probably harmless. I didn't care. Like, I did this gymnastic thing. I probably jumped 7 feet past that thing, and I had the fastest mile after that. My heart was going, and I had a great pace. I ended with my fastest time ever. But when we're thinking about marriage, we don't always see the snake. We don't always see the danger that is lurking. And so hopefully, through this time, even later today and tomorrow, we're going to expose the dangers that we have and the ways to combat those things so that we can grow and, again, strengthen our marriages and strengthen our church. So, Chris, can you pray for us, and then we will get started.
Lord God, I thank that we could be here today, that we're talking about such an important topic. I pray for Dr. Merck as he comes and teaches, and I pray for us that we be receptive. In Jesus Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Well, welcome back to all of you. In fact, Stephen, he didn't tell us the story. He hid that from us. He's probably in the same path that he took his mother yesterday to run.
It was the same path.
Just last week, our daughter and son-in-law, and there's 6 kids, were having some work done in the garden. And they have a huge cactus plant. I mean, it's probably 15 to 18 feet tall. And as the guy was working there, he saw inside the cactus a large snake. He called 2 other men with him, and they killed the snake. It was about 7 feet long. We've never seen this kind of snake in Brazil, but the venom is potent enough to kill 16 men. And it was right past the trampoline where my grandkids play all the time. So it was a big deal. And then we got a picture from our nephew,
My brother.
from your brother, of a rattlesnake that they had just killed. So these are really not everyday occurrences, but they do happen from time to time. And now none of you will ever come visit us in Brazil again. Won't go out in the yard. All right, I want your hands free. Our first session tonight, we got a lot of ground to cover. Last night was an overview, and we learned 3 key words which summarize the message of the book of Song of Solomon. So we're going to come out of here tomorrow night with an entire book in our pockets, and in a simplified way, we can remember 3 key themes based on the choruses that are repeated exactly 3 times in the book. The first one is the chorus of patience. Time is our greatest ally in solid, godly relationships. The second theme, which takes us right to the halfway point of the book, which is where I want to get tonight, is purity. The second P, patience, purity. And then the key verse of the book in chapter 8 talks about the perseverance of married love. Those 3 words summarize this incredible rose in the scriptures, which in a lyrical way, in a poetic way, tells the story of Stephen and Stephanie, Solomon and the Shulamite, whose very names describe the complementary relationship that they enjoy. It's a fascinating thing that her name is only revealed when we get to chapter 6, after they've had a major disagreement, reconciliation, and forgiveness, and we perceive that the couple has grown closer together. In fact, I'll give away some of the secrets. This is the hard thing. My wife tells me I can't give it all away right at the start, because then you won't come back. But on their wedding night, as he verbalizes his affirmation for her, his love for her, his appreciation for her, he literally describes her from the crown of her head on the way down. 7 descriptions, both of her beauty in his eyes and her character. Those two always walk together. But after their major problem, they get together again. They seal forgiveness through a second consummation marital relation. And the second time, he has 10 descriptions of the beauty of her character and her appearance. His love has grown, not just in spite of, but because of the difficulties that were resolved in forgiveness. So there are amazing messages that really summarize the whole Bible as we go through. Now, we actually passed a flower shop this afternoon. My parents were florists for 10 years. I was their delivery guy, so I drove everywhere. I have done a lot of stuff with flowers. My wife doesn't even let me bring flowers into the home. She likes them outside, but I like flowers. Imagine, though, that I had this incredible, beautiful rose that came right out of our garden. I have one rose bush in Brazil that's still living. And I give her this beautiful rose, but it's still a button. It's still encased. And she's impatient, and so she wants to see the beauty of the rose, so she's going to help it along a little bit. And she literally dissects the rose and destroys it in the process. Because the only way you get to perceive the beauty of the rose is through patience. You need to let it grow with time. And that's really what the first part of the book is all about, the Song of Solomon. True love, according to the Song of Solomon, in this storybook romance, is really like looking at the pages like we did last night. It's all Stephen without a beard and a young guy. I mean, Jen just robbed the cradle. But,
I am older.
yeah, you what? Are you
I am
older?
older.
Never would have guessed that. And following along the history of this couple, it's not a running film, a movie, a video of the relationship of the couple, but snapshots. So we do have to read between the lines, and that's going to happen a lot tonight, but it's not that hard. If you read different commentators, in fact, there were 500 commentaries written on the Song of Solomon up to the year 1700. I mean, nobody understood what the book was about, but everybody wrote about it. That's pretty much what I do in my books too, I guess. But we already saw that the 3 words that summarize the message of the book: patience, purity, and perseverance. Patience, time, is true love's greatest ally. Purity is true love's greatest gift, and perseverance is true love's surest sign. In your syllabus, page 3, we're going to plow in and talk. Tonight is really, for those of us, I think, that I can tell, everyone here married? Right? I mean, legally? Yeah, good.
No, illegally.
A lot of what we're going to talk about tonight really relates to our relationship with our children and even our grandchildren. It's a burden that my wife and I have every time we come back, and it's the heart of our ministry. I'd like you just to share something that kind of set the stage for what we're talking about, why we're talking about this. Tonight we're going to deal with the patience and purity, and really coach you as you coach your children, and perhaps even have influence in the lives of your grandchildren as they grow older.
I think it's something we've observed living in a different culture. When you come back after time, there are different things that jump out at you that when you're in it, you don't perceive, because there's minute changes. But seems like over the last several years, parents have this idea that when their kids reach the age of 18, then they have no more jurisdiction over that child of theirs, that they can't give them instruction, they cannot help them with their major decisions, they can't even ask them questions because, you know, that's their privacy, they're 18, they're their own person, and I don't have any way of influencing them. And we stop to think, that's when our kids are making the biggest decisions of their lives, 18, 19, 20, 21, and we're the ones who are closest to them, who know them best, and who want as much as they do that they get it right. Why not? It doesn't, we don't understand why parents are afraid to influence their adult children. Not that you're gonna be the same as you are with a 2-year-old, but we need to guide them, we need instruction, we need to have heart-level conversations and help them in their relationships and in their major decisions.
To do that, we talked about, a couple years ago, we were talking about child rearing, the difference between starting out life and the lives of our kids as being their best friend when they're 1, 2, 3 years old, which almost inevitably leads to becoming their enemy when they're 17 and 18. We start out as authorities to develop friendship, and if we invert the funnel and then try when they're 8, 9, 10 years of age and totally out of control to close it off, they pop out. And we have rebellious teenagers, young people. So, especially for those who still have, and there's some of them even here, young kids, yes, we have a loving relationship. We disciple and we discipline. Those are the two huge responsibilities that all parents have. But we start out with a closed funnel, and we are always giving more and more liberty as they show themselves to be responsible and position ourselves so that when they're teenagers, when they're college career age, we can still have an influence in their lives. So much of what we're going to talk about tonight has to do with preparing us as coaches in that sense of our kids. What we saw last night, biblical marriage is each for the other and both for God. I think that kind of summarizes in a good way what the scriptures talk about. Now, open your Bible, chapter 1, and we're just going to go verse by verse and talk about this photo album of the love relationship, which starts out intense. These are not teeny boppers, 14-year-olds looking across the room at one another. They are well advanced in their relationship, whether it be courtship. There was really not a dating history at this point in time in the world. The book starts sharing about the seasons of love. And so there's a cycle which kind of describes what most of us probably went through in our own relationships. Dennis Rainey, in his book, Family Ministry, Ministry to Families in the 21st Century, talks about churches that need to focus, not just like Stephen and Hannah, focusing on parents married with 2 or 3 young children. That's our tendency as preachers, to talk to the group where we are. Like when I became a grandfather for the first time, I saw grandparenting everywhere in the Bible. So now I'm applying my messages to grandparents. Well, the church needs to be sensitive to all of these cycles. Young people who are courting, dating, engaged, newly marrieds, preschool children, junior age or teenage kids, the empty nest, grandparenting, and we should actually include widowhood. Is it widowhood? Widowhood? I don't know. Some hood. When you're a widow or a widower. These are normal life cycles that involve the family. And interestingly enough, the book kind of starts out exactly that way. So look at chapter 1. Verses 2 through 4, you have the copy of these circles on page 3. We saw last night, the book begins with the Shulamite speaking and expressing her desire. This is not a platonic relationship. It concerns me when we counsel couples and and there's like no desire, no temptation, yeah, they need to keep that under control. But if there's none of that, that raises some concern. She says, let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth. For your love, that's a word that's used 39 times in this book out of 61 times in the whole Old Testament. But it's not that altruistic, other-centered love. It's really talking about caresses. This word, dodi, my beloved, is where the name David actually comes from, which means beloved. But when it's used in the scriptures in this book, it really has to do with physical love. She's saying that his caresses are better than wine. Your anointing oils are fragrant. But notice the balance. This is not just hormonal, erotic attraction, which is normal and should be present. But it's got a depth to it. Your name is oil poured out. The idea of name in the scriptures is character. In Exodus, we see God declaring his name, and there's a list of attributes. Loving kindness, compassion, mercy, but he will also not forgive the guilty. Therefore, virgins love you. That note of dissonance already enters into the text, because she's talking about other gals that are there in the palace, in the court. We'll see that in just a second. And here she says, she calls after him, draw me after you, let us run. Well, that's the opposite of the message that we're sharing here in the first part of the book, because after this, everything is going to say, slow down, guys. But her desire is to run. Probably all of us have experienced that. During our time of engagement, it was probably a fortunate thing. Our engagement was 16 months long, but 5 months of that, my wife was in Brazil doing her student teaching. I was here, and then she went to Cedarville to finish her last semester, last year of school, and I was a pastoral intern in New Jersey. So God kept us really far apart. And I'll tell you a little bit later about how we had to communicate when she was in Brazil in the old days, 1982. But the passion was strong, and we had to put safeguards in place so that we didn't run too fast. And then she says, the king has brought me into his chambers. That sounds a little bit sensual. If it said the king has brought me into his chamber, then I think we've got a problem in terms of the way I see the book developing and culminating in the consummation of the relationship in chapter 5. At this point, it seems like she's just saying that she has come from her northern home near Lebanon, and he's brought her to the palace to introduce her to his family, to his friends. But that leads to the second stage. That presence of the damsels, not in distress, but in competition, now becomes more clear. In verse 4, the second part, maybe your Bible says others. This is probably those ever-present ladies in waiting, perhaps the virgins, the daughters of Jerusalem. And now they have something to say. What do they say? We, that's how we know that somebody else is talking at this point, will exult and rejoice in you. In the original text, that's a second person masculine singular. They're talking to him, not to her. We will extol your love. That's the same word that she already used for him. Your caresses. More than wine. They're saying the same thing she did. There's competition. There's interference. And then the same thing that she said about the virgins loving him. Rightly do they love you. This already introduces in the normal cycle, perhaps you can remember back when you just started dating, all the games that we play and the competition and the jealousy sometimes. But that continues also into marriage. Insecurity, interference. Last night we talked about how the husband and wife relationship is a reflection of the very Trinity, 2 in 1 reflecting 3 in 1, and then in the New Testament, a reflection of Jesus' love for his church. But the enemy hates that. And so all sorts of interferences in the husband-wife relationship, whether it be addiction to social media, video games are one of the principal causes of divorce in young couples today. They both come home from a hard day of work. He shuts himself off in the room, 2-3 hours. She's maybe taking care of the kids, washing the dishes, preparing something to eat, and he's playing away because he needs some relaxed time. But it's destroying marriages. Sports can do that. Television, friends, hobbies, ministry. In-laws can be an interference. And sometimes, with honor and respect, men need to stand up and draw a line in the sand with their own mother. You cannot talk to my wife that way. Because we as men, above all things, are protectors. And so when sometimes mom and dad won't allow us to cut the umbilical cord, leave father and mother. Cling to your wife and become one as a new reflection of God's image. When others are putting down our spouse, whether it be her own parents or yours, children can also be an interference. It's not at this point in the text, but in a broader sense. We can allow our children to come between us and separate us when we treat our children as the rulers of the home and not welcome members in our family. All of these influences, anything that drives a wedge between husband and wife, is inevitably vandalism on the reflection of God's glory in the home. In the stages of love, in the light of what that anonymous group of women say to her beloved, she expresses her insecurity. Look at verses 5 through 7. She says this: I am very dark. She's been on the beaches of Florida too long. But the reason she's dark is that she's been burned by the sun. No solar protectors, 70, 80, to filter out the sun, because she's a hard worker. Oh, daughters of Jerusalem, now we know who we're talking, the people who were talking a little bit before. Dark like the tents of Kedar. That was from her region in the north, where dark wool, rough like the calluses on her hands from working in the vineyard. Like the curtains of Solomon. That's his reality. That's their reality, because she's back now in the palace. Do not gaze at me because I am dark, because the sun has looked upon me. My mother's sons. Why does she call them her mother's sons? It's possible that they're just her brothers, but there's a really good possibility, since the father is never mentioned in this book, that these are some sort of step brothers. At some point in time, they were angry. The Hebrew word for angry is literally, they burned against me. So there's a play of words here. They burned against me, and the sun burned me, and now I'm dark. And she's living in a world of princesses who hardly ever get out in the sun, who probably have never done a hard day's work in their lives. And she shows up at the palace, this northern gal with an accent, burned by the sun, obviously a worker, a commoner, a Cinderella. She's insecure in the light of all of that. They made me keeper of the vineyards, but my own vineyard I have not kept. The vineyard throughout the book, as well as the garden, describes herself. She didn't do all the cosmetic treatments that they did. So she's clearly feeling insecure. I remember so well, many, many years ago, as you can tell by this picture, when I met my wife for the first time. I met her at John F. Kennedy Airport, believe it or not. I was waiting at the foot of the stairs from the airplane as she came off, and I swept her into my arms, gave her a profound and intimate kiss, and we went off into the sunset. Not. Her brother, with whom I played soccer at Cedarville University, had actually asked me, with another friend, to pick her up at JFK if she missed her flight to Albany. Now, I had already seen a picture of her. He actually took a picture of Carol Sue to one of our practices. And for some reason, oddly, really, all the other guys in the team said, "You're going to marry her." And when I saw her, I said, "I'm going to marry her." But we still had a 5-hour drive because, strangely, she missed her flight. Now, I, to this day, don't know who called in that bomb threat to JFK that made her miss her flight. Just kidding. I didn't do that. Most of you probably don't know, but her grandfather was the founder of the ministry we work with today called Word of Life, Jack Wurtson. He was an incredible evangelist, literally preached to millions of people throughout his lifetime. But I didn't know much. I'd heard him a couple times at a rally in northern New Jersey preaching, but when I got to the Wurtson house, when I saw the camps and the empire, which was the ministry that her grandfather, I was so intimidated. I remember to this day walking into the foyer of his home, and I'm just a country boy from southern New Jersey, simple family, poor family, lots of problems throughout the family. And I went to sign the guest book. And I looked a little above my name. And I saw the name Neil Armstrong. Address, the moon. And then there was Dr. Jerry Falwell, Liberty Mountain. And the next name, David Merck, Berlin, New Jersey. My friend who accompanied, we spent a week up there, started to develop a friendship, but I went home so discouraged. I thought, I will never, ever penetrate this family. Impossible. That's probably how the Shulamite felt. And you probably felt that the first time you met her father with a shotgun at the door. Or so many other situations. That's a normal progression. Our kids are going to go through that. We go through that. Now, no sooner has she said that, verse 7, she appeals to him. And he's done the unthinkable. I don't know how many of you have watched on Netflix The Crown. There's a few episodes which I would not recommend, but it's an amazing history of royalty in England, tracing most of Elizabeth's reign. And there's a scene where Charles leaves Diana to fend for herself, surrounded by all the royals, and they literally have the camera going around. She doesn't know what to do. She doesn't know how to curtsy. She doesn't know who she greets first. That's exactly what takes place when Cinderella shows up in Jerusalem at the palace. He takes off. Ecclesiastes tells us that he had all sorts of flocks and vineyards. And so she cries out, verse 7, another photo in this album, "Tell me, you whom my soul loves, where you pasture your flock, where you make it lie down at noon. For why should I be like one who veils herself beside the flocks of your companions?" There's only two types of veiled women in this context: prostitutes or widows. It could be either one, but it's probably a prostitute. What she's saying is, I don't want to go wandering around the tents of your colleagues like one of those women of the night who go from tent to tent selling their wares. She wants him to be the initiator, but he's left her all alone. That insecurity that she experiences now leads in verse 8. This is a little bit controversial. To second interference. Somebody says to her, if you do not know, O most beautiful among women, follow in the tracks of the flock and pasture your young goats beside the shepherd's tents. Now, there's two ways of looking at this, and we don't know really. It could be that he's playfully, say, playing hide and seek. You don't know where I am, but come looking. Accept that. That's exactly what she said she didn't want to do. That would be harsh. That would be cruel. That kind of sarcasm, almost beautiful among women, come find me. The other possibility is that it's once again the interference from those virgins, ladies in waiting, daughters of Jerusalem. And now the phrase would be, if you don't know, O most beautiful among women, walk from tent to tent. That's where you come from anyway. That's your life anyway. Well, the reason that's why I think this is what's happening here is because this phrase, O most beautiful among women, occurs 3 times in the book. And the other 2 times, it's the daughters of Jerusalem who say it. So it would be totally consistent with what's happening in this life cycle of love if they are the ones who are provoking her until he responds. And now the knight in shining armor, perhaps better, Prince Charming, speaks. Verses 9 through 11. 9 and 10. He talks to her and reassures her. He resolves her problem. I have a problem with ideas like you need to fill up your love tank. You need to build her self-esteem, self-image. The big problem with self-esteem and self-image is self. That's not what we're doing. It's not flattery. It's genuine appreciation. And what he says to her to calm her fears and the insecurity and to put to rest all of that interference. He says to this, I compare you, my love, to a mare among Pharaoh's chariots. I talked about that last night. Not a good thing to say. You're a beautiful horse. But what he's saying is, you are unique. You're like a solitary mare prancing through the stables of Pharaoh with all of those stallions panting after you. There is no one else on the face of the earth that I would rather have. And then he describes her. Your cheeks are lovely with ornaments, your neck with strings of jewels. And at that word, look what happens in verse 11. That same group, we, speaks again. But this time, it's a different song. Oh, wait a second. Wait, they already perceived that she won. And they better get on the right side, on the right team, or else. We will make for you ornaments of gold studded with silver. It is impressive how a man's words, public words of appreciation, of love for his wife, can remove temptation, eliminate insecurity. As men, we don't often like to talk a lot in public. And it's maybe, like my wife doesn't like when we have romantic get-togethers, whether it be the church or the seminary where we teach with all the students, and sometimes they have guys getting up and they recite poetry, they sing songs and all of that kind of. She doesn't like that. So she doesn't like me to take her flowers. I took her flowers for 10 years before she told me, I don't like your flowers. So you gotta know and study first. No, but she doesn't like them inside. She doesn't like the petals falling over the house and all that kind of stuff. But you need to know what she appreciates. And for those of us in ministry, Billy, you better be listening. John, Stephen, anybody who has a public platform, you better make it really clear to everyone in the congregation that you only have eyes for one woman. Because a lot of the gals out there may think that you are as good a husband as you talk about when you're up there preaching. And your wife knows it's a little bit different than that at home. We need to make it really, all of us. And that's what he does. So here's some applications from the very first part of the book. Parents and churches, we need to teach this to our kids. When they're 8, 9, 10 years of age, the world's already gotten to them. They need to understand the standards of patience and purity in godly relationships. The stuff we teach here in these family conferences, you need to take that home and teach your kids. Sometimes it's like we're hiding stuff from our kids. You need to explain to your kids what you're doing as a parent. The discipline, the discipleship. Give them your secrets. Love is patient through the seasons of life and enjoys each phase. I think the book starts out like this, just kind of showing us multiple stages that take place because our tendency is to do what she wanted to do. Let's run. No. Patience. And we'll see that more clearly in a few moments. It waits for the right person at the right time. Marriage isn't for everyone, and that's another thing we need to teach our kids. The first major decision along these lines, God may be calling our kids to a life of singleness, of purpose to serve the Lord. 1 Corinthians 7. Sometimes we are always trying to marry. She's 19 and she's not engaged yet. That's kind of changed now. It's 29 and she's not engaged yet. But that might not be God's calling. That might not be the stage that God has. Dialogue and mutual affirmations of appreciation are essential. My ex-boss, president of our seminary, passed away several years ago. When he taught this book, often said that, and he didn't mean this in a demeaning way, and I'm going to just translate it, but he said, women are verbal animals. Animals not in a bad sense. He was just saying that as men, oftentimes we are not. There are exceptions, but they need to hear. You probably heard the story of the couple that was celebrating their golden wedding anniversary, 50 years of marriage. And the pastor celebrated that repetition of their vows. The wife came to him and said, Pastor, would you please talk to my husband? He never says, I love you. And so the pastor, kind of just awkward, but he called the guy aside and said, you really need to tell your wife you love her. And he said, Pastor, I did that when we got married. If I change my mind, I'll tell her. That's not going to work. They need to hear. And we do too, but we'll see that as we go a little bit further through Here's the lesson we pull out from this first part of the book. True love, I can't say that phrase without hearing Princess Bride. True love. Try to forget that, although I keep repeating it. True love grows through the seasons of life. That's the message of patience. I'll do one more section before we have our break here. Here's what happens right after that. Chapter 1, verse 12, all the way through 2:7. I call this the DNA of love. What's going to take place here now is he's expressed his love. She is unique. She is like a solitary mare, exciting all of the stallions around, and he only has eyes for her. But now they're going to go back and forth, and we're going to see this development of the DNA of love, which is flowing within its banks. When our love remains within the channels that God has described for it, it is life-giving, energizing. But as you know, when those waters overflow their banks, it's destruction and disease. This book, once again, like the rest of the scriptures, is teaching us the characteristics and the way love should conduct itself as it goes through those banks. So here's why I call this the DNA of love, because after his statement about her, now she responds expressing her appreciation for him. And then he responds, once again, repeating his appreciation for her, and her for him, and him for her for him. And then we get that chorus, which chimes in because these mutual affirmations of others-centered love culminate in sexual tension. They desire each other. That's normal. That's natural. And it's good. But it has its place. And that's where we get the first of the two choruses. I adjure you, daughters of Jerusalem, do not arouse or awaken love until it's time. Let's look at that quickly, and then we'll have our break. The DNA of love. First off, she responds to his praise with her own appreciation. Verse 12. While the king was on his couch, that's probably a royal banqueting scene. Just like really the Last Supper should have been painted, with Jesus and all the disciples actually reclining on a pillow on their left elbow and eating. That's how Jesus gives the portion to John or to Judas. It's probably describing a royal banquet. My nard, that's a weird word, not nerd, but nard, it's perfume, gives forth its fragrance. What she's saying is, I know he's in a state dinner, but all he's thinking about is me. And then she says the same thing. My beloved is to me a sachet of myrrh, perfume, that lies between my breasts. In a day without deodorant, what they would do, the women, would be to take perfumed petals of roses or other flowers, and they would hang them between their breasts in a place that would emit a sweet savor, a sweet smell. And what she's saying now is he is like that to her, she is like that to him. And now she says, like he had told her, she was a mare among many stallions. My beloved is to me a cluster of henna blossoms, a bouquet, in the vineyards of En-Gedi. En-Gedi was the principal oasis in the midst of the desert. That's where David fled to get away from Saul. And she's saying the same thing to him. I only have eyes for you. If all the other men are sand and gravel, you are a bouquet of flowers, an oasis to me. Love is growing. As they get to know each other, they discover, they appreciate more and more one another. Next, verse 15. It's his turn. Behold, you are beautiful, my love. He says it again. Behold, you are beautiful. 9 times in the book, he's going to tell her she's beautiful. Your eyes are doves. A lot of translations say your eyes are like doves, but that would make them little two black pointy things that round. That's not the point, as we said last night. She quieted his spirit. Not just her appearance, not just her body. He wants her. She responds. Behold, you are beautiful, my beloved. That's masculine. Truly delightful or desirable. Now here's the interesting thing, guys. Don't get too discouraged. In the book, 9 times he tells her she's beautiful. She says that to him 1 time. That's it. Scraps off the table. You are handsome. Now she's going to describe him later on like he's a rock. But he does that a lot more. And that may be really true to reality in terms of relationships. She then says this, our couch is green, the beams of our house are cedar, our rafters are pine, probably referring to some place where they had their first encounter, a meadow, a forest, and they're just walking together. But the message that we are getting loud and clear is that true love, not only patient but pure, is what the New Testament describes by a one-woman type of man and a one-man type of woman. I mentioned this last night, but the scriptures are so clear. Everything in our day is fighting against that. Sorry, Stephen, for the snake. He has a trauma ever since he was bitten by a rattlesnake. I don't know why. We face that danger every billboard we pass, practically every show we watch, every click on the computer. It might just be news. And we have a decision. These two, at least at this moment in their relationship, are describing, I only have eyes for you. Next. She continues talking about the place, but here's one of those problematic verses. Chapter 2, verse 1, which has been so misinterpreted. She says this about herself. I am a rose of Sharon. Now, some of you might have in your ESV Bible, note number 3 says this. Probably a bulb such as a crocus, asphodel, or narcissus. This word, Hebrew word, only occurs one other time in the Old Testament, in Isaiah 35, verse 1, and it describes a crocus or a tulip. She's not saying, you know, you're right, I am really special, I'm the only one of my kind. She goes on, I'm just a lily of the valleys. Lilies were common. This is a spring flower, and there's millions of them. Last week, we went to Longwood Gardens down in South Pennsylvania with a cousin. I hadn't been there for many, many years. There's millions of these flowers all over Longwood Gardens. This is not Jesus. He's not just one among many. It has nothing to do with Jesus. I'm really sorry because there's some churches, the First Baptist Church, Lily of the Valley, or, Rose of Sharon and stuff like that. It's all wrong. What she's saying is the same thing she said in chapter 1. I am dark but lovely. I'm not perfect. And so as we go through the book, we're going to discover beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. You need to think that she's the most beautiful woman in the world. You need to think that he's the most handsome guy in the world for you. Now he responds. This is classic. No. You're not just a little flower of the meadow among so many others. He says to her, as a lily among thorn bushes. If all of the other women on the planet were thorny bushes, you're the only flower. Who asked last night? Somebody asked, have I ever tried? This is a good one. Skip the nose like the Tower of Damascus and the mare among the stallions. This one you can use. So is my love among the daughters, literally, probably referring to all those around. So now we're back. Now it's her turn to talk to him, and she says this. As an apple tree among the trees of the forest. Now here's what you need to know. Apple trees were imported in Israel. They're not common like Stephen and Hannah have several in your yard, right? 2. Several. Maybe you have a lot. In a forest, you don't find apple trees. Imported, expensive, aphrodisiac. You know what that means? Aphrodisiac. Okay. In their culture, raisins, apples, some translate apricots, that was mandrakes, they're going to talk about later. They were love stimulants. But it's in the middle of a forest. She's saying the same thing. He's already said, you're like a solitary mare in the midst of the stables. You're like a bouquet, and all the other men are just sand and gravel. They're saying the same thing. This statement, an apple tree in the middle of the forest, you're just walking through, you're hunting, and all of a sudden you come upon this incredible peach tree. That just doesn't happen, but that's what he was. All the other trees, all the other men were just a bunch of leaves. But he was an apple tree. With great delight, I sat in his shadow, or I sit in his shadow, and his fruit was sweet to my taste. Here's just a little glimpse of what we learn in the rest of the Bible. We're going to see here about roles of husband and wife. See, she knew what it was like to work in a hot 105-degree sun in northern Israel. She knew what it was like to be parched and calloused. But in him, she found her protector, her defender, her shade. That's our role as men. Love values the character qualities of the beloved. There's a sad thing that happens, like the church in Ephesus in the book of Revelation, when we lose our first love. When we counsel couples, and oftentimes they'll sit on two sides of the sofa and we ask, well, how can we help you? And say, me first. Hey, pastor, this woman, she takes care of all of the stuff in the church, and she doesn't do anything. Oh, you're going to talk now, you who are a deacon in the church. Well, let me tell you, when was the last time you prayed with me? When was the last time you did any kind of family devotions? When was the last time you paid our bills? You know what I see in front of me? Two devils. Mutually accusing one another, just like Adam and Eve. One of the first things we ask people to do, stop trying to change your spouse, because God wants to use this conflict to change you to look more like Christ. Secondly, I want you to go home and think of all the things that you have done to destroy this relationship. And thirdly, I want you to list the things that attracted you to your spouse in the first place. That's what Jesus tells the church in Ephesus, to renew its first love. Love protects the beloved. A husband's role is that of a protector of his wife. A woman should seek security and the protection of her husband. Everything in our culture is arguing against that. Telling our young women to be independent, self-sufficient, and never to need a man to support her, to take care of her, because she's strong. In almost all of our contemporary films, movies, whatever's being produced, we have women who are heroines. There are no more damsels in distress for us guys to save. So I'm asking for guys to be knights in shining armor, and even if you have to fake it, for you gals, to be damsels in distress. To save Cinderella. At least let him think that he's doing that. Let him be an apple tree.
Can you repeat those 3 points that you...
No, absolutely not. This is all, it's all inspired on the moment. What did I say?
Two couples sitting on a couch and you want them to go home and ask 3 things?
Oh, okay. Let me see if I can
Don't try to change your spouse.
Okay, number 1. This was very spontaneous, by the way. Don't try to change your spouse. God uses conflict to change us. Number 2, what have you done to contribute to the problem? Our tendency, especially as men, is we got 5% of reason, 5% of justice, and we'll defend that hill to the death. She's 95% right, but I'm not giving up this flag. Jesus had 0% of guilt, and he took 100% of the blame. The idea is, in Christ, we should be the Adam that Adam never was. Wives should be the Eve that Eve never was. That's what Jesus can do when he builds a home. And number 3, what attracted you in the first place? Take the focus off the negative to the positive. That happens in an incredible way. Tomorrow night we're going to see, because tomorrow night is really, for all of us married couples, how to deal with conflict in the midst of that. All right, let's finish up, because we got still a bit to go here. She continues talking, verse 4, the last part of the DNA of love. Another verse that has been very poorly interpreted, because it says this: he brought me to the banqueting house, literally to the house of wine. It's not a bar. The house of wine was the palace in a state dinner, but it's a public occasion. And now we get that phrase, his banner over me was love. The banner was literally a flag or a banner that armies used. If you think of Lord of the Rings and the approach of 4 mighty armies with their banners congregating, uniting the armies to face that final battle. That's the idea. They would be placed against the walls for an army to reunite as they've been scattered throughout the battle. What she's saying is, he is not ashamed of me. His love is an open love. It's not hidden. When our kids think they have to hide their relationships, something is wrong. David, our oldest son, who spoke here several weeks ago, part of his testimony in terms of keeping open doors of communication. This was by God's grace. I screwed up so many times, Stephen, no testimonies. He came to me when he was probably, 12 years old, 10 years old, and tested the waters about somebody he might have had an interest in. And instead of throwing cold water on that and saying, what are you talking about? You're only 10 years old. You can't think about girls. We talked about it. What are the qualities you like? And the fact I took him seriously opened the door for us to be able to communicate and talk about those kinds of things. When we don't have that relationship with our kids and they have to hide their love, that's not love. It's not a good relationship with them on our part either. But that's not the case. He wasn't ashamed of this country mouse that was now in the palace. With all of that, he's won her heart, and she says this, sustain me with raisins. Raisins were that word. Thank you. Say it, Stephen.
Aphrodisiac.
Thank you. Refresh me with apples, or maybe apricots. It's hard to know what the right translation, but it was also that same function. For I'm sick with love. She's fainting. Verse 6 probably should be translated, not his left hand is under my head, his right hand embraces me. That's the position of lovers. But her desire, because the Hebrew phrase can easily be translated, many Bibles do this. May his left hand be under my head and his right hand embrace me. What she's saying is, I want it now. It's time. I can't wait anymore. And when she says that with that crescendo of the DNA of mutual appreciation, we get our first chorus. Patience. I adjure you, O daughters of Jerusalem, by the gazelles or does of the field. What does that mean? For those of you who are hunters, we follow all of Stephen's hunting stories. You don't just go prancing up to the deer. These are mountain animals. They can see anything that's approaching. And if anything foreign gets too close, too fast, they're gone. What she's saying is, love is that way. You can't rush it. You don't force it. Don't stir it up or awaken it until it pleases. Time is your ally in true godly relationships. True love overcomes insecurity through open and honest dialogue. Love considers the other as unique. Beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. But ultimately, true love is only a Christ love. We can't do this on our own. We can't increase appreciation throughout our lives. True love is characterized by the others. Each one is more interested in the other than his own gratification. I am crucified with Christ, Galatians 2 says, yet I live, not I, but Christ lives in me. And that other-centered life we're going to see as we go through the rest of the book. We're going to stop here. Godly relationships grow through patience and affirmations of others-centered love. When we come back, we will find the couple after a period of winter, separation, some coldness comes into the relationship, but they come together again, and we'll see what happens. 10 minutes? All right.
Here tomorrow.
You're not gonna be here.
I'll be here
Oh,
tomorrow.
good. Woo. The idea of patience overlaps the idea of purity of love. This is a biblical message from the beginning of the scriptures to the end. I don't know how many of you have watched Shipwrecked. Is that the name of it? Castaway. Would you imagine? Remember, I mean, you go back and watch some of these older things with Wilson and all, but it's a long movie with just basically one guy after the crash of the FedEx airplane. But imagine yourself stranded on a desert island after a shipwreck with no natural sources of water. After a few hours, the scorching sun, dehydration sets in. And the irony is you're surrounded by water on all sides, but nothing to drink. And if you give in to the urge to drink that salt water, ironically, you will die bloated with water and dehydrated. Because a process of reverse osmosis will cause your circulatory system to try to neutralize the salinity of your plasma by taking out the little bit of pure water in your red blood cells to reduce the salinity in your circulatory system. You literally will die dehydrated and bloated with water. So what does that have to do with love, romance, and sex? That is, in my opinion, exactly what's happening today. We have more and more people who are seeking polluted, salty sources of sustenance. They are bloated with pornography and sexually dehydrated, needing more and more and more, and all it does is dilute their purity. Probably, and some of my better friends, best friends, and many authors would say that this is the big challenge to the church today. That the worm of immorality, principally through pornography, is eating the soul of the church from the inside out. So all the declarations we hear about being a one-woman man and a one-man woman are really for us, so that this doesn't happen to us. Drinking from these fountains can refresh us and renew our commitment to purity. Now something happens from 2:7 to 2:8 in our Bibles. When we last saw our heroes, she was crying out in a sort of mutual accountability group to the daughters of Jerusalem to help her to keep her passions under control because it wasn't time yet. All of a sudden, this album of photographs of their history, there's a gap. And we come to chapter 2, verse 8, which makes it very clear that after a long period of separation, they're coming back together again. Separation and reunion are part of the life cycle of love. So I can remember back during our period of engagement when my wife was doing her student teaching down in Brazil, and I was a pastoral intern in South Jersey. Our only means of communicating was by letter, which took 3 weeks to go back and forth. We've come a long way since then, because now in March we get our Christmas cards from the States. So it's about 3 months now. Or by phone call, which was extremely expensive and impossible for us. I was making literally $5,000 a year as a teacher's assistant in the public school where I grew up, and then less than that as a pastoral intern. Or by ham radio. And so Carol Sue would go into, she was in São Paulo, that metropolis, to missionary friends who had a ham radio and a room full of people. They would patch through shortwave radio to the United States to a ham radio operator that no one had ever met before, who would make a long distance call, but within the United States, from North Carolina to New Jersey. And here's our conversation. Hi, honey, how are you? Over. She would respond.
Hey, I'm great. How are you doing? Over.
We went 5 months like that. It was horrible. A room full of guys listening to our intimate conversation. Oh, you're like a mare among many statues. Oh, you're my turtle dove. It just didn't work. But you know, every relationship goes through that. Sometimes in the marriage itself. Not talking about distancing or coldness, but for example, our son Daniel serves in the United States Air Force. His daughter was 10 days old and he was sent to Kuwait. He was there for 7 months. He didn't see his wife, he didn't see his daughter. First 7 months of her life. They had to invent ways, and by God's grace, he would get up at 2 o'clock in the morning, via Skype or FaceTime, pray with his wife, have some kind of family devotions, what we call Sofa time. We're going to share about that in a few moments. We've talked about that before here. Take an hour and then go back to bed and wake up with the other soldiers. Distance doesn't have to mean the end of the relationship. It can actually be a strengthening, just like the rings of a tree, periods of consolidation. And again, it's time, patience, but also purity. So here's where we are. Look at chapter 2, verses 8 through 14. The voice of my beloved. Behold, literally, look, she's calling her friends. She's back home again. She left the palace. We're going to see that in a second. She's back near Lebanon with her friends, her family. Now he's going to be on her piece of turf. Behold, he comes. And this is the most funny part of the whole book of Song of Solomon. Because she describes him as though he were this newly released calf after a long, cold Clark Summit winter, who for the first time is getting out. The snow has just melted. It's June 15th. Just about. And he's bounding around like this wild cat, calf, leaping over the mountains, bounding over the hills. My beloved is like a gazelle or a young stag. You can just imagine this newly born calf who's free in the meadows at last. But now the text is a little bit complicated for us anyway. Behold, the second time she says that. And again, other people are participating in their relationship. That's a subtle message. Their relationship is not exclusivistic. It's exclusive, one for the other, each for the other, both for God. But it doesn't shut out other people. And so she gathers her friends. Look, there he is. He's coming. There he stands behind her wall. He's looking through the windows, looking through the lattice. This guy's a peeping Tom. Call the police. No, that's not what's going on here. There's probably a wall separating them. He's just trying to get a glimpse of her. This guy, and the whole text pulsates with the rebirth of love after winter. Now he talks. His invitation. My beloved speaks and says to me, arise, my love. My beautiful one, come away. We have a date. For behold, the winter is past. Winter and springtime are going to characterize their relationship. We see that clearly through the text. And he gives 7 descriptions of the end of winter and spring, the season of love. The rain is over and gone. The flowers appear on the earth. The time of singing has come. The voice of the turtle dove, that's the voice of the apostles preaching the gospel, is heard in our land. Sorry, just kidding. The fig tree ripens its figs, and the vines are in blossom. They give forth fragrance. Second time, he says the same thing. Arise, my love, my beautiful one, and come away. Now for the second time, he describes her as a dove 5 times in the book. That's his favorite epithet, his favorite way to describe her. But look how he describes her at the end of this text. Oh, my dove, in the clefts of the rock. That's where doves like to hide, especially in a rocky territory like Israel, because it's safe. So there's still some insecurities here, and he's inviting her to come out and see him and renew their relationship in the crannies of the cliff. Let me see your face. Let me hear your voice. Someone has said that when we're in a passionate dating or engaged relationship, our intended could read a telephone book list. Remember telephone books? And we'd be, oh, wow, it's beautiful. But something happens with the passage of time. Okay, listen to this again. I won't give it away now, but if you read the book and come to the very end, you're going to see something amazing in the growth and maturity of other-centered love, where he wants to hear her voice even after a long time of marriage. That's supernatural. That's a reversal of what is common for us. Let me hear your voice, for your voice is sweet and your face is lovely. Now, he wants her to give herself to him. We're approaching the wedding day, but she's afraid. She's hiding, and there's a reason why she's hiding. This is why I love biblical exposition that interprets texts within the context. Well, I'm not going to give that away yet because I want to just share some applications. The development of true love often involves periods of separation and then reunion. It's part of the life cycle. Love longs to hear the voice of the beloved. At the end of the book, it still is like that. Couples need to cultivate the habit of communication at deeper levels of intimacy in a context of grace. I could spend a whole night just talking about that. When you know who you are in Christ, nothing to gain, nothing to lose, nothing to prove, the golden mask falls. Your heart is exposed, and you can give it to whomever you desire. In that context of unconditional love that accepts the other as he or she is, but is not willing to leave him or her as she or he is. That's a wrong concept of grace. Grace wants to be an instrument of change in the life each of the other. But when the defenses are down, and the other is able to point out areas in our life that don't look like Jesus, and you can, without offense, in a godly, mature, other-centered way, hear that kind of criticism without self-defense and rationalization and justification and banging the door on your way out, you can get to a deep level of intimacy in all of life. That took a long time for us to learn. We've been married 10 years probably. When we discovered grace for Christians, that's another story. But the golden mask comes down somewhere. And communication at a deep, intimate, grace-filled, other-centered level takes you places you would never be able to go on your own. Love passes through stages which require reminders and renewal. Oh man, we got to talk about date nights and retreats and all this stuff again. Yeah. Do it your way. There's no verse in the Bible that says you should participate in a couple's retreat. You must converse so many minutes every day with your spouse. You do it your way. The question is, are you connecting? Are you communicating? Is there demonstrations of mutual appreciation on a daily basis, but also at a deeper level occasionally, however you do it? Now, what works most for us, and it's not a law, is this sofa time stuff. Maybe you can tell us about Sofa
It's
time.
not original with us, we learned it from a course we took. And the idea is that when you both come home at the end of the day, if you're both out working or if one's home, the other one comes home, whenever, you both arrive at home, to invest the first 10, 15 minutes communicating, getting on the same page. Now, the people who invented this had only 2 daughters, so it was convenient for them to sit on the sofa and do that. For us with 6, that would not work. So in our home, Dave would come home, we would go in the room, close the door, and our kids were taught, this is our time. So unless there's fire, blood, some sort of emergency, you do not knock on the door. And sometimes they'd forget, it says an emergency, oh, sorry, forgot.
Stephen, get away.
This is our time. And so we're talking 10, 15 minutes. You know, Dave tells me what went on during the day. I know what struggles he had, what were some of the challenges, what were some of the blessings. Sometimes we talk about invitations and get things on the calendar. We're on the same page. And I would tell him what happened during the day, what's going on with each of the kids. He knows if he needs to help somebody with one thing, if he needs to, do a little talking to somebody else, whatever. He knows what's going on at home. 10, 15 minutes, and that's it. And he would go out and play with the kids, I'd make dinner, and that's it. And what the question a lot of people ask is, okay, I like that idea, but why not wait until the kids are in bed? And then you don't have to do just 10, 15 minutes. And the answer is, we wanted it to be very, very clear to our children that our priority, our relationship is priority. Because on a daily basis, they were seeing mom and dad investing in a relationship. First thing, as soon as you came home, we are on the same page, and our children are very loved and very welcome, and we're grateful for them, but they leave, and we're gonna stay. And so we wanna keep this relationship strong, and that gave our kids a lot of security, knowing mom and dad are still good friends, they still like each other.
That's sofa time, that's just one way of doing it. You can find your own way, but the important thing is that we connect after periods of distancing. Maybe now you're both working at home, you've been doing that for the last year. Maybe it's not as important, but even in that context, we need to have times when we're on the same page. So daily, after periods of some sort of forced separation, yearly, conferences like this. A lot of you have got, either you've got childcare taken on some other place, or your parents are watching the kids. You need that. We all need that from time to time. Now, here's the amazing thing. Why is she this timid dove? When you interpret the Bible contextually, you're asking questions about why is this verse next to that verse. Chapter 2, verse 15 explains why she is so reticent to come out of the clefts of the rock. It's that verse that many of us know from this book, catch the foxes for us. It's probably her talking. We don't know to whom she speaks, but it's for them as a couple. The little foxes, they don't look like they're that dangerous. But those little foxes destroy the vineyard of love just when it's getting started. And they keep going. That's why she's hiding in the rocks and he's calling her out. Now, this is where we really need to cut off the transmission, because I'm going to do something that I don't want anybody else in the world to see. But I got to illustrate. This little dove needs to be protected against the little foxes. So she comes out, ooh, ooh, and sees a fox. Okay, that's all I'm doing. What are the foxes? There's all sorts of foxes. Male passivity started in Genesis chapter 3. Insubmission began when Satan whispered in the ears of the wife without acknowledging the husband who was the leader and protector. She took the lead. Superficiality and indifference, apathy in our relationships, selfishness and pride. The little fox of third parties that we already talked about. Internet and pornography use. Sexual warfare, where we use sex as a weapon. Withholding, diminishing, What God has made is the glue, or perhaps even better, the seal of the covenant that he demands be repeated often so that you celebrate two becoming one. That's a biblical command. And we then use what God has given to draw us together as a weapon. Bitterness and unresolved anger are little foxes. Now, how do we kill little foxes? We interpret the Bible contextually. We look at the next verse. She gives the answer. We often take it out of context, but look at chapter 2, verse 16. The answer is this. Catch the little foxes for us, the little foxes that spoil the vineyards, for our vineyards are in blossom. My beloved is mine, little foxes. He grazes or finds pasture among the lilies. She is the lily of the valley. We already saw that. He finds security and peace and acceptance. That kills the little foxes. So as we look at the interchange here, she's a dove that's afraid to come out because there's little foxes that are always trying to destroy the relationship. That's what Satan is doing. And yet the commitment, whatever happens, we're going to get to the end. When we had our premarital counseling, our counselor made us practically swear that divorce would not enter into our vocabulary. You walk into that room, you lock the door, and there's no other way out. It's amazing how you find solutions to your problems when you get in that room and you start stamping on the foxes. The mutual commitment until death do us part is death for little foxes. Now, I'm going to let you in on another secret. We got 13 minutes. That's the second chorus in the book. The chorus of exclusivity or purity. I am my beloved's, my beloved is mine. Verse 16. But that refrain is repeated 2 other times in the book. Remember I challenged you last night to try to look for that? I want you to notice what happens as love grows through the seasons of time. The second time, different than the refrain of patience, which is practically the same all through the book, this one changes. Oh, there it is. In chapter 6, as married people, after a major conflict, part of the resolution comes when she again says this. I am my beloved's and my beloved is mine. Do you notice what changed there? The first time she says, my beloved is mine. I possess him. And I am his. I belong to him. The second time it's inverted. And she says, I am my beloved's. I belong, and don't forget, I possess. The third time, now as a mature woman, after the reconciliation has been consummated in sexual union, the third time she says this, I am my beloved's. I belong. But she doesn't even have to say, I possess. It's amazing. That's the other-centeredness of a Christ-centered home that forgets about itself. The transition as love grows from beginning to the end of the book, and one of the arguments, reasons why I think there really is a progression to the wedding night and then to higher levels still, is because we see the ever-growing other-centeredness of a mature, godly love that kills little foxes. Another phrase here comes in and says, until the day breathes and the shadows flee, turn, my beloved, be like a gazelle or a young stag on cleft mountains. Once again, the sexual tension is growing. Having said all of that, we belong to one another. It's time, isn't it? She literally invites him to come up to the cleft mountains. That last phrase, a young stag, she invites him as a young stag on cleft mountains or mountains of separation, probably refers to her breasts. There's lots of different translations, but everything suggests that that's what happens. Not happens, but what she wants to happen. That leads us now to the second threat. The first one was little foxes. The second one is another separation. They already went through a winter, and she doesn't want to go through this again. This is probably one of the hardest passages in the book to interpret in this linear narrative description, because a lot of this sounds so sensual, erotic, that people think, oh, they're already in bed together. But as we interpret through the book, it seems more likely that this is some sort of a dream or a nightmare of another separation, and she doesn't want that to happen. She says, on my bed by night, I sought him whom my soul loves. I sought him but found him not. Why? Because he wasn't there. I hope. I will rise now and go about the city and the streets and in the squares. I will seek him whom my soul loves. I sought him but found him not. The watchmen found me as they went about in the city. Have you seen him whom my soul loves? Scarcely had I passed him when I found him whom my soul loves. I held him and would not let him go until I had brought him into my mother's house and into the chamber of her who conceived me, the most intimate place in her mother's home. Some would say, oh no, they're already having relations here early in the relationship, but that doesn't make any sense when we get to literally the climax of the book in a few verses ahead. It seems more likely, in my understanding, that this is a nightmare in the context of another separation, and this time, that's not going to happen again. Right after this, we come to the wedding procession. But the next verse, once again, at the peak of desire, is the appeal for patience and purity. I adjure you, O daughters of Jerusalem, by the gazelles or the does of the field, do not stir up or awaken love until it pleases. There's a time for everything, and everything has its time. And we need to teach our young people. An illustration about like this that maybe you can recall. In Brazil, we have what's called a churrascaria. Fogo do chão, some of you have probably seen. Maybe one or another of you have maybe even eaten in the big cities, and it costs like $60 or $70, and you eat all the meat you can possibly eat for as long as you want to eat it. And they bring 16, 17, 18 different cuts. We have a problem here?
Yeah, we're all hungry.
No. I mean, the best cuts of all types of exotic animals that you can eat. We've eaten just about everything in these places, but there's often a waiting list. Same thing happens with Outback in Brazil. There's a few Outbacks, and almost inevitably there is a long waiting list to get your bloomin' onion. I don't like bloomin' lines, and I want to stand in any bloomin' line, but we go every now and then. And what they'll do oftentimes is give you a buzzer. And so if you're at the mall and there's a churrascaria or an Outback, you get your buzzer and it's 45 minutes wait. So you stick it in your pocket and you start wandering around, but you almost forget about it. Now imagine being outside the churrascaria, wandering for 35 minutes, and you come across a popcorn salesman. He's selling 3-day-old popcorn with opened Coke that's warm and no fizz. You didn't eat lunch that day. You maybe didn't eat breakfast. You may not have eaten for a week because you want to get your money's worth out of the churrascaria. And so you buy the popcorn. You stuff your face with 3-day-old popcorn and wash it down with no fizz Coke. And all of a sudden, you don't have any appetite for filet mignon wrapped in bacon with garlic. We have a lot of young people eating 3-day-old popcorn off the street. And God's got a banquet for them. That banquet, for those of us who know the Lord and are married, with all of our failures, all of our problems, can last for 60 or 70 years. My mother and father-in-law have been married 66 years. They just celebrated their 70th anniversary of their first date. My mother-in-law was 14 years old on their first date. I just wanted to tell her, Mom, this isn't going to last. I don't recommend dating a 14. that relationship is destined to failure. When they've been married 70 years, it's going to all fall apart. No, just kidding. It's possible. There's a saying in Portuguese that says, "Quem come apressado, come cru," which basically means those who eat too quickly eat raw. Every relationship goes through periods of tension, danger, separation, distancing. Every relationship. Requiring grace and forgiveness. Commitment to the exclusivity of marriage vows is foundational to its survival. But isolation and loneliness can be overcome by the renewal, daily, weekly, monthly, yearly, not because marriage is our God, but because marriage reflects our God and must be protected and preserved. And we have to teach our kids about that. Patience and purity. I'd like to extend an invitation to all of you to a wedding ceremony tomorrow night. Because the big day has finally arrived. Chapter 3, verse 6 describes the procession, the wedding night, the honeymoon, and then the first big fight. That, and so much more, if you come back tomorrow night. That's it.